second part of the two-parter dedicated to the line with 4 knight c3 in the advanced variation. In the previous video we discussed the move 7 bishop e3. In this video we will have a look at the move 7 h4. I recommend the move h5. Knight f4, and now c takes d4. The main line is bishop h7, which is completely fine and very playable. However, I pretty much like the move c takes d4, which leads to very messy positions. Knight takes g6, f takes g6. And this position needs some explanation. Black has taken quite a couple of liberties in the opening. Not only did he give up his bishop pair, he also allowed his opponent to corrupt his pawn structure. The pawn on the g file looks very ugly, and the pawn on h5 even softens up the g6 square even further. Also, Black traded his only piece that was developed. All his other pieces are still on the back rank. But there are also quite a number of good things about the black position. This position is very complex. White has also committed some positional sins in the opening. White kept pushing pawns. These pawns are very vulnerable and weak now. The pawn on e5, the pawn on g4, and the pawn on h4. Black's idea is to follow up with knight c6, targeting the e5 pawn. He can enhance the pressure with queen c7. Another very important point revolves around the f5 square. Black tries to bring the knight to f5 via e7. Black is arguing that white cannot keep the pawn on g4. White will either have to take on h5 himself, after which the f5 square is available, or black will take on g4, again, freeing the f5 square for the knight. Once the knight lands on f5, it will be an octopus, so the position is anything but clear. But I really like black's chances. White has several moves in this position, for example, queen d4. Let's have a look at bishop g5 first. Bishop e7, knight b5. And as we've seen in the previous video, king d7 is possible in quite a number of occasions. This is the case in this position. Black takes on g5. Knight d6 check. If white takes on g5, we will see what happens then. Let's have a look at knight d6 first. Knight d6, king d7. This king is very safe on d7, and there is not much white can do about this. Bishop b5 check, knight c6, h takes g5, and knight e7. Black is ready to take on g4, followed by knight f5. The white king on e1 has not castled yet, so the opening of the h-file might also be a bit problematic for white. Another plan could be a6, and once the bishop cannot maintain the pin any longer, there is also knight e5 in the position. But now what does black do if white takes on g5 immediately? Knight c6, queen d3. And here there is a very strong move for black, which you will probably find on your own by now. The move I'm talking about is king to d7. This is a very strong move, after which black is already clearly better. Black is prophylactically stepping out of queen takes g6 check. Now after queen takes g6 we could take on e5. This is not problematic for black. Another idea is bishop b5 check. Knight c6, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes d4. If white plays knight e2, we can take on g4, knight takes d4, rook takes h4, rook g1, and now g3. Strong move, after which our rook has more space. F takes g, rook e4 check, king f1, and king d7. Black deliberately goes to d7 with the king, protecting the pawn on c6, protecting the pawn on e6, and finding shelter. If white plays queen takes d4, black can play c5. Also, queen b6 is very fine. White has two ideas, either queen f4 or queen d3. After queen d3, bishop c5, queen takes g6 with check, but it's not a problem. King d7, rook h2, knight e7, queen d3, h takes g4, and black is for choice. If white plays queen f4, black goes knight h6, queen g5, knight takes g4, queen g6 again with check, again we play king d7, and again black is to the fore. Also possible instead of queen b6 after queen d4 is the move c5. Queen d3, knight e7. White has different ideas here. For example, queen b5 check is a very bad idea. Queen d7, queen c5, knight c6 is already winning for black. 14 bishop d2 is possible. Queen b6, long castle, c4, queen h3, rook b8, and after b3, queen a6. The position is pretty double-edged, both sides have their chances, but I like black. The main move I checked is bishop g5, but then after c4, bishop takes c7, cd3, bishop d8, rook d8, cd3, hg4, long castle and bishop e7. Black will win the h4 pawn, he will not be able to hold the g4 pawn. The position is double-edged, both sides can play for a win, but there is nothing black needs to be afraid of. A very playable position, and it is not impossible to outplay your opponent. The main move, of course, is 10 queen takes d4, knight c6, and white has a number of options here. There is bishop b5, queen b6, queen d3. It would be very good for black to trade queens, because that would underline the weakness of the pawns on e5, g4 and h4. So white does not want to trade queens, queen d3, long castle, bishop c6, queen c6, and here white again has a couple of moves. Queen g6 would be a terrible blunder because after d4 black is winning, the knight on c3 is hanging and the rook is hanging. Only move is knight e4, but then after knight e7 white can resign. A better move is 14 bishop e3, bishop b4, long castle. We take everything on c3, and here we have two possible moves. We can take on g4 or play b6. In both cases the position is very playable, and we can play for a win in the endgame. The main move is bishop g5. Black plays rook e8, long castle, and here the most precise move I think is bishop c5. Queen takes g6, h g4, king b1, knight h6, takes, queen g4 and rook h to g8. It is true that black is a pawn down in this position, but things are not so bad, I think. I think that the black position is very playable. After queen takes h3, the pawn on f2 is currently hanging. We will first play king b8. After f4, we can play rook f8 or h5. It's not clear how white wants to make progress in this position, and black should hold this position reasonably comfortably. I don't think that there is any serious disadvantage for black. Actually, I think that the position is close to equal, just a tiny bit better for white. However, I think that this is the most that white can get out of the whole line starting with 4 knight c3. This is the variation that is the most problematic for black. But I think this is very good news to get an endgame that you should draw quite easily if you don't go completely mad. Let's come back to this position. After knight c6, queen d3. Knight ge7. White has a couple of moves here. If he goes knight b5, that's usually not a problem. Knight takes, queen g3, knight 7 g6. White has two moves, bishop f4 and g takes h. If g takes h, then a6, f4, knight f7, knight c3, g takes h, bishop h3, d4, knight e2, knight b4, queen b3, d3, and black is slightly better. If bishop f4, there is a long variation where black sacrifices in exchange, and the position is equal after a long sequence of moves. Bishop d6, long castle, short castle, takes, king b1, and now we sack the exchange. Rook f4, queen takes, rook f8, queen g5, knight takes g4, bishop d3, takes, check, king f7, check, another check, queen takes h5, knight c3, spoiling white's pawn structure, and queen f8. And this position is approximately equal. The main move is 12 bishop g5. We take on g4, long castle, queen a5. White has two moves, bishop takes e7 or knight b5. After knight b5, knight f5, king b1, bishop e7, knight d6, and as usual, king d7 is very fine. Bishop e7, king takes, queen e2, queen c5, queen takes g4, knight takes e5, knight takes f5 check, and g takes f is not completely clear, but black is pretty safe in this position and has nothing to be afraid of. If white takes on e7 on move 14, we take with a knight. Bishop e2 and knight f5. King b1, long castle, bishop g4, queen f4, rook to g1 and queen f4. This position is also rather unclear. Black has a very nice knight on f5, the queen is well placed on f4, the pawns on f2 and on e5 are weak, however white has slight initiative on the g-file. All in all, it can be said that the position is unclear, both sides have their chances, but I think that the black position is very playable and I would rather be black here. The whole variation with knight c3 is very complex, very double-edged. It can go